That photograph I put up at the beginning of this video is today the Cuban embassy. But in the 60s, when I worked there in my school holidays, it was a publishing firm called Blandford Press. And what a wonderful location it is too. It's just around the corner from the British Museum, the British Library, of course, where Marx and I think Freud researched their great books. And it's in Bloomsbury, which is the heart of the literary world. There are publishers, book dealers around. And the whole of the West End is within a mile of it. You can walk all the way to Hyde Park Corner. It's about a mile away. And to the south of it, there is Covent Garden Market, which then was a fruit and vegetable market, and the Savoy Hotel just over you could go over Waterloo Bridge and just go over the bridge and be in Waterloo. So it's a wonderful location. Now, Blandford Press, when I worked there, it fitted perfectly. This little publishing company fitted perfectly into that building. There was the reception and the people that answered the phones on the ground floor and took orders and issued the invoices. In the basement where I worked, there was a little warehouse and a dispatch department. On the second floor, there was some kind of the artists, the people who designed the page and regulated the appearance of the book. They were there. A bit of a mystery to me. They were guys in corduroy suits with beards. I didn't really understand them. The next floor up, there were journalists who ran the magazines that they published and the books as well. And then on the top floor was the managing director and probably a few other people, leftover bods from before. And the managing director happened to be my Uncle Ernie. Now, he was an interesting man, a good businessman, and he made lots of money. In the wartime, he had what you'd call a good war, I suppose, and when petrol was rationed, everyone else was getting around on foot. He had a car. I don't know how he swung that. And he specialised in taking over businesses that weren't turning a profit and turning them around and making them a pay and selling them on. And that was how he came to Blandford Press. But Blandford Press was a keeper, and he worked there and stayed there for many years. In fact, the firm had been founded in association, I think, with an evangelical society, the MRA, which stood for Moral Rearmament, and they published their books. And the MRA, which originated in America, I think as Buckmanism or the Oxford Group or something of that sort, or the MRA, and they boomed in Britain in the 20s and 30s, and I suppose after the shock of the First World War, nearly about 900,000 British people, British young men, died in that war, and probably 3 times as many were injured, and some of them maimed and destroyed for life. And everyone, millions of men who took part in that war, came back, were damaged psychologically and affected by it. And every family in the country had lost someone or been struck by that war. So it was not to mention the many colonial troops that were also involved. The Australians, Canadians, probably the Indians and the Chinese too. They were all there. But in Britain, after the war, a lot of people were emotionally, psychologically shattered, and they were looking for answers. What had caused this catastrophe? And some of them found that answer in themselves. It was their sinful behaviour. They hadn't observed the church. They'd drunk too much, fornicated probably, and it was their fault. And they wanted to rearm themselves morally and create a better world. So this organisation boomed in the 20s and then in the 30s. But then, of course, come along the Second World War, and when the bullets start flying, you're not so interested in moral rearmament. You're actually you want real rearmament, and then after the war, well, people didn't worry about who to blame. They didn't blame themselves. They knew who was at fault. It was the Germans and the Japanese, and the Italians probably had a hand in it as well. And of course, later on in the 60s, we realised that the communists had been at the bottom of it as well. They'd provoked the Germans. So that's how we understood it. Anyway, that was where the firm was on its uppers, and that was where my Uncle Ernie came in. When I worked there, there were still piles of these MRA books in the basement gathering dust. They weren't selling. So the firm was broke. My Uncle Ernie came along, put a bit of his own money in, and got involved and managed it and turned it around. He introduced a few new lines. One of the books that they published, or one of the series of books they published, was spotting books. In the 50s and 60s, young men didn't have computer games to play, so what they did was they went around spotting things, and these spotting books were pocket-sized, and you could carry them around with you, and they every page had a colour illustration on it of the thing you were spotting. It might be a bird or a plane or a car or a tree or a plant or something like that. A whole series of books, and they were ideal presents for young people, young men. I had quite a few myself, and if you saw you saw a bird up in a tree, you could flick through your spotting book and identify, oh yeah, that's a woodpecker, and you could tick it off. I've seen one of those, and you could go on see some more. But as us, and magazines as well, trade magazines. Blandford Press published 2 or 3 of those, I think. One of them called Glass Age, which was everything to do with glass, I suppose, the glass industry. Another one was Travel World, which was where my father worked. He was the main man on Travel World, I guess, and he sold space, did a bit of journalism, and generally hobnobbed with people in the travel industry, which at that time was booming. I mean, the technology of plane travel had come on leaps and bounds during the war. There were plenty of pilots around, and there were a lot of men around who'd been in Europe, and they tasted wine and olives and seen the beautiful blue Mediterranean Sea, and they wanted to go back there with their wives and children. Of course, British people, I mean, the British economy wasn't exactly booming after the war. We still had huge debts to worry about, but at least we were better off than the French and the Italians and other people around. And you could probably go to Spain, for example, and have a holiday for less money than it would cost you to go to Blackpool. And so the business thrived. And Michael Clerney was in charge. He was one of these people that he could do anything. If a toilet needed unblocking, he'd say, why should I get a plumber? Why should I pay a plumber to do it? Roll his sleeves up, do it himself. And he was that kind of guy. Or he didn't. I mean, in my family, he got a reputation for being a bit mean because he didn't give his money away. And but it's not really fair because he was probably a believer in the deserving and undeserving poor, and we weren't particularly poor, and we certainly weren't particularly deserving. I know he gave money to poorer members of the family who were deserving, but he didn't give it to us. And he was a canny man. He didn't waste his money on cigarettes and drink like other people. He saved it and invested it wisely. And that's why he was rich. One of the things I had to do was go up to his office every week and collect my wages. He gave it to me in a little brown wage packet and probably drew it out of petty cash. And it was only about £4.50 or something. It was a lot of money to me at the time, but he used to say, everything all right? Going all right down there, is it? And he'd say, yes, uncle, yes. I was a bit in awe of him. And you know, that'd be it. I'd go. And anyway, I worked on the ground floor, on the basement floor, with the people in the warehouse and dispatch department. Their job was to collect up any orders that came in, sort the books out, package them up, and send them upstairs to be dispatched in the post, I think, probably because there wasn't, as there is now, all the delivery companies and so on, everything went by post. And I worked down there, and I learnt a lot down there. Most of those, there were about eight or nine other young men, men of all ages actually, and they'd all either done their national service and been in the army or actually been in the war itself, and they all had great stories to tell, and they were ribald and profane, but once they knew who I was, once they realised I was just a youth, they opened up, and I learned many things there. And it was my introduction to the working world, I suppose, and I learned a lot from those guys. They had wonderful stories to tell, and they were very, like many working people, they didn't know a lot, they hadn't had a higher education, but they were articulate, and they could tell a good story. So I learned a lot from them. And I used to, in those days, of course, we used to have tea breaks. And I learned a lot in these tea breaks. That was when most of the talking took place. And being the dog's body and the lowest of the low, it was my job to go and get the tea. A woman came in and brewed up. The whole firm had tea. In those days, everybody drank tea, and everybody had milk and 2 sugars. Well, nearly everyone. There was the oddball that had 1 sugar, but so it was easy to remember the order. You could go down and get 8 cups of tea, and they all had milk and 2 sugars. So, as the dog's body, that was one of my jobs. I went up to get the tea, and I was coming back with a tray of tea one day, about 8 cups of tea, and I was getting ready to go through the swing door, which divided reception from the back of house, and a rather glamorous, good-looking young woman of about in her middle 20s came bustling through the other way, and I the tea went up in the air, mostly landed over me, and the cups went everywhere and broke up. Luckily, I knew who she was, and she was a very nice woman. I'd been at her wedding a few years before, actually. She was married to my cousin, Peter. And she was very nice about it, and she helped me clear up and dry myself off as best I could. And I got another tray of tea and took it downstairs, drank it. So anyway, that was Blandford Press. There's many more things I could tell you about it. I've been reminiscing over it for the last week or so, and it's brought back lots of memories. But we haven't got time for all that now. So that was Blandford Press, and that's my tale of it. So I'll see you later.